Welcome to the Ethical Humanist Society. I'm going to ask everyone to mute their phones.
Good morning.
And be seated. Welcome to the Ethical Humanist
My
Society.
name is
Svetlana Beckman. I'm a member of the board of the Ethical Humanist Society, and I will be your moderator today. Welcome to the I welcome our live audience, as well as those joining us via YouTube. And after our speaker completes his presentation, I welcome will have an opportunity to ask questions. Joining us via YouTube. So let me start by saying a few words about humanism, which is the philosophy that animates the Ethical Humanist Society of Chicago. Let me start by saying a few guided by reason, humanism, which is and informed by experience. The humanistic life stance urges us to guided by reason, humanism, which evolved through the ages and developed through the efforts of thought humanistic life who recognize that values and ideals, however carefully wrought, are subject to change as our knowledge and understanding advance. And I wish that it was me who said it. I don't know who said it. I should attribute it to the right person, but in any event, wherever I found it, to me, that really well captures humanism as a philosophy. All right, on to today's program. Our programs here feature a wide variety of topics, including current events, philosophy, arts, and sciences, to name just a few. Today's presentation is part of our ongoing programming related to politics. Our speaker today is Ray Long, who is a Chicago Tribune investigative reporter, a two-time Pulitzer Prize finalist, with experience in reporting on state capitol, city hall, courts, and counties. He covered 2 governors who went to prison and a certain state senator who went to the White House. The topic of Ray's presentation today is his new book, and a very timely book, called Michael Madigan and the Exercise of Power in Illinois. Ray, welcome.
It's really great to be here. I'm going to take this off if that's okay with everybody. I really appreciate the invitation today, and I am thrilled to give this presentation. So if you have any questions you want to shout out in the middle, it's okay with me too, but Svetlana is okay. Is this a little bit okay with you, video, audio, visual guys? I'll speak up a little bit. How's that? Is that better for you? Everybody back there can, okay. Well, again, I plan to talk about some of the highlights and the lowlights of the time in Springfield of ex-Speaker Michael Madigan. He was the longest serving leader of any state or federal legislature in the United States. He was a Southwest Side Democrat who ruled his chamber, the House, for 36 years. He held the Speaker's gavel for 36 of 38 years between 1983 and 2021. He learned from Chicago Mayor Richard J. Daley, the first Chicago mayor named Daley, the man that perfected machine politics. And he became his greatest disciple, in my opinion. The arc of his career spans from his deep roots on the Southwest Side in the 13th Ward, where where his dad was a ward superintendent and Madigan himself was the committeeman since 1969. Madigan's dad was a friend of the first Mayor Daley. They got to know each other while they worked in county government when they were both starting out. And young Madigan served as a committeeman, like I said, since 69. He turned that ward into a political powerhouse, and he eventually was one who could decide who won and who lost during every legislative session because of the position he held in the House. He could act like a stopper on bills. He could act like a person who wanted to get specific legislation through, and as a result, he was a tough negotiator, and he would eventually decide basically what bills could pass and what could fail, what bills would go to the governor, what bills would be crushed. If you read the Chicago Tribune last weekend, we had a story that told how in the 2018 session, Madigan worked with a ComEd lobbyist to push 2 cronies into jobs at the giant utility. At the same time, he was giving the utility the green light to kill legislation that his daughter was pushing, which was pro-consumer and was to help out people, low-income people, who just needed a break in getting things like their reconnection fees waived or things like that. So the 2 cronies that he wanted to get on board were a former alderman, Mike Zalewski, from the 23rd Ward, which is a neighboring ward to the 13th Ward, and the other one was Juan Ochoa, who used to be the McPeer chief, and he wanted a seat and eventually got a seat on the ComEd Board of Directors, a state-regulated industry. And the former alderman got a basically no work, little work, very little work job, and that was for $5,000 a month. The backbone of that story was the indictment. As you all know, Mike Madigan was indicted with that ComEd lobbyist, Mike McLean, back on March 22nd. It was a 22-count federal indictment that charged racketeering, conspiracy, bribery, wire fraud, and attempted extortion. Now, Madigan is turning 80 later this month, and so he will have an extended period before he goes to trial, if he goes to trial, if he chooses to go to trial, or if there's other possibilities. The whole case could collapse, or he could plead out. We don't know which way the wind is blowing on that, but if you've paid attention to the Ed Burke case where he's been charged with corruption, you know that these things can last a long time. Madigan stands accused of participating in multiple illegal schemes. He allegedly engaged in schemes designed to get state land transferred to Chicago so that developers could throw his private property tax law firm some business when this deal got done. Today, I want to focus on how Madigan became a legend, and then I want to talk about how he fell off the throne. In the book, I outline 3 areas that helped him develop this all-powerful, legendary status. He was big on the whole reapportionment game. This is where you really don't see a lot of it happen because it only happens once every 10 years, but you're hearing a lot about it now, nationally, because a lot of Republican-led states are trying to tilt all their Congress seats toward Republicans, drawing the lines. The whole issue of drawing the lines has become so sophisticated since I started covering the legislature in 1981, where they literally would use pieces of paper and try to get everything together with addresses and line everything up, to the system today, which is so sophisticated that they know how each person voted in primaries, you know, not who you voted for, obviously, but whether you voted Democrat or Republican, and they can draw those lines inside and outside to cut a house out if they don't want that house, and they can draw the lines so they can tilt the districts to the point where they can predict who could win, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. And so it has become this increasing issue here. Barack Obama came to the Illinois House in his last year as president, and he talked about congressional redistricting. It's the same way with the state, but he talked about how what happens here is that these lines are drawn, and then you have arguments on the left side of the spectrum in Democrat tilting districts, and you have arguments on the far right side in Republican tilted districts in the primaries. And the primaries become the big battlegrounds. And then what happens is you've lost the great middle. You've lost a lot of the people who are more moderate, and the people who win in these tightly contested races are the ones who are on the outer edges of their party. So this has become an issue that is one that's gotten even Eric Holder, the former Attorney General, involved in trying to bring a change to this overall redistricting issue. But Madigan was a master at it, and he actually, I want to tell you how he started, because it's hard to believe they have this system in Illinois, but in 1981, my first year in the legislature, he was Minority Leader Madigan, and George Ryan, who went on to his own infamy, was Speaker of the House. He was a Republican. And they battled over trying to pass a map out of the House. Ryan was obviously trying to push a Republican map, and Madigan was doing his best to stop it. Well, Ryan got a Republican map through for Congress, and then he couldn't get the Republican map through for the state legislative House and Senate seats. And it was this brutal battle, and this is for people who aren't following it day to day, it's hard to explain how brutal these battles are, because it's life and death really for some lawmakers where the lines are drawn. And in 1981 it was particularly brutal, because that was when the cutback amendment was going into place. For those of you who don't remember, or remember it vaguely, or even remember it in total, the big deal was that after a lame duck pay raise that was jammed through the legislature in 1978, Pat Quinn, who was a young maverick at the time, pushed to have a cutback amendment placed on the ballot. And the cutback amendment changed the way the House was made up from 177 members to 118 members. It took one other step too. Illinois used to have this unusual system where you would have 3 lawmakers in each district, and you could vote for, you could put 3 votes for one person with a bullet, or you could vote for 2 of the 3. There'd usually be 4 candidates, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans, or you could vote for 3 individuals, but you had 3 votes in the House race, and the goal was to have 2 people from a majority party and 1 from a minority party. And that way, people throughout the state, whether you were in the majority party or in the minority party, you'd have somebody with a similar ideology, et cetera, to go to. Well, the cutback amendment eliminated that. When it eliminated the seats, it went to single-member districts. And as a result, with single-member districts, I'm not sure anybody foresaw this, but it consolidated the power with the legislative leaders, because the people running in single-member districts needed more assistance to raise funds, to battle for their particular seat, and as a result, they leaned more on legislative leaders. One of the things that Madigan was able to take advantage of over the years, because it was a great fundraiser. And the way the Democrats won the first time that he became Speaker was Ryan, as I said, had passed a map, but that didn't get through, passed a congressional map, that didn't get through the Senate. The congressional goes on to the courts. The state legislative, the House and Senate districts, go to a commission when they can't reach an agreement in the House and Senate. That commission has an equal number of Democrats and Republicans, and then when that commission can't get a decision, they actually pull a name out of a hat. There's a Democratic name and a Republican name put into a hat, and they pulled one out. And this time, When they deadlocked, they pulled a Democratic name out, and then Madigan was able to draw the map, and Madigan suddenly became Speaker, and that's when he started his 36-year reign. And so he had built up so much power that when Republicans actually drew the map the next time around, he was able to still maintain the speakership 4 out of the 5 races that were in there. And then Democrats got it, and Democrats had both the Senate, the House, and the governorship in 2010 under Pat Quinn, and they just passed a map, and it was all Democratic. And of course, you know, J.B. Pritzker said, I'm gonna do it fairly, et cetera, which Quinn did too. And when the Democrats got it, they controlled both houses, and they sent it to Pritzker, and he signed it, and it was pretty, you know, they followed the same kind of pattern. They slanted the districts all toward Democrats. They were in power, and they wanted to keep it. And that's how we've now got this, these huge Democratic majorities in the 2 chambers. And you just have to marvel at the idea that Madigan became Speaker largely because of luck of the draw. And he was smart enough and worked hard enough to, you know, maintain that power. But the way it started is one unusual quirk. No other state does it like that. The only time he lost to the speakership was in 1994. And for those of you who remember, Newt Gingrich had put this contract for America out and had really pushed for a Republican thing. This was Bill Clinton's midterm election in the first year, so there was a Republican tidal wave that year. And House Republicans picked up 13 seats in Illinois, and that knocked Mike Madigan out of the speakership the only time he lost. He was smart enough to focus on demographics and picked up 6 seats in the suburbs the next time around and retained his speakership and held it until last year. All signs pointed toward Democratic efforts to tilt state and federal lines once again under new Speaker Chris Welch, and they did. The people in charge, like I said, have incredible ability to craft these boundaries. And he looked at his staff, and they're all grim-faced, glum, and he said, "What's up?" And he said, "Well, we can't get the votes for the White Sox." And he says, "No, this is not going to happen. We're a 2-baseball town. We're a 2-team town. We're going to keep it that way." And so he goes up to the Senate. He pulls Senate Minority Leader Pate Phillip aside, and they start calling in Republicans, and Thompson says, "I need this one. This is personal for me. We got to keep Chicago with 2 towns." So he starts turning votes. But it takes a while. And Phil Rock, who was in the Senate president, the Democrat from Oak Park, you know, finally gets the bill up on the floor when they think they got the votes secured. It's late in the day. It's after 11 p.m. The deadline is midnight. And what happens at midnight is that it'll take a 3/5 vote rather than a simple majority vote to get legislation passed, like White Sox legislation. And so the pressure is on. Tim Degnan, the senator from Bridgeport area, says, "You know, it's the last of the 9th. We need to get a grand slam here. I hope you're all White Sox fans." And they start popping up, and Republicans who you wouldn't even think were going to be supportive popped up and went on board, and they passed it. And it's then 11:40, and Thompson is running across the rotunda, you know, through the crowds, the lobbyists, and they open up the big wooden doors of the House, and he's got spotters on the floor there, and Madigan is a White Sox fan, so he's like crazed to help this out too, but he's got his daughter sleeping in his office, and he's got the list in his office, and the lights are off in in his office, and he's fumbling around trying to find the sheet of paper that says who might flip votes, you know. So he finally gets it, tears out into the house, and he's working desk to desk. And you know, the score is really, they call the roll call, and the roll call, you know, they may be 10 votes down when they first start, and then eventually they get to maybe 6 votes down, and then there are 3 or 4, I don't know, I don't recall off the top, it's in the book, but it was an amazing period. They even had live radio broadcast going on at this, on WMAQ, and the broadcaster, Charlie McBaron, was going, I don't know what clock they're looking at here, but it's got to be getting close to midnight. The Democrats had disabled the clock. And so I'm looking up at the scoreboard there. They have clocks ticking up there, and it's just like flashing odd, crazy, nonsensical signs. You know, it's not like numbers or letters or anything. It's just flashing weird stuff every second. And they get to like too short, and you know, it's clearly past midnight. You even hear on the radio, the radio recording, if you get a chance to listen and if you're interested, still is up there under Charlie McBaron and White Sox. And you can hear that midnight beep, you know, that big loud noise that comes across, that sharp pitch that hits at midnight. And they're still debating. A guy named Jim McPike was the majority leader, and he took over, grabbed the gavel out of the acting speaker's hand, and that was Peg Breslin. She was an anti-White Sox vote. And he takes over, and he's almost like a quarterback with 2 minutes or 2 seconds left in the game. You know, he's shouting out, so-and-so, do you want to change your vote? And they go, yes, I'd like to change my vote. And then so-and-so, do you want to change your vote? They finally get to like 59 votes, and Thompson's waving his hands, and he's standing over a Republican named James Stang from the suburbs, and he says, and then Stang stands up and says, I changed my vote to aye, and that's 60 votes, what they needed, and the place went up for grabs. I mean, all the people who were opposed to it, who had been singing na 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 na, hey, hey, because they already thought the time was up. Florida broadcasters were going live too, and they were going, the Sox are coming to Florida, the Sox are coming to Florida. And then McPike sees Stang's vote, and he goes, slams the gavel, and he says, at 11:59, the bill passes. And so that is, and then, you know, we're like, you know, this is an incredible power play. And I ran up and with a bunch of other reporters, and we grabbed the roll call from the clerk, and it says 12:03 on it. So then Thompson, who was buoyant and practically levitating on the floor, you know, coming off, and he walks into a scrum of reporters, and we're going, hey, it was 12:03, and he says, was not. 12:03, yes it was. Carol Fowler from Champaign TV station was saying, it's 12:03, it was after midnight. And he goes, was not. And then he says, the speaker said it was 11:59, and no court in the land is going to rule differently. And it went to court, and no court ruled differently. And in fact, a judge in Florida said, you know, only a couple of times time has stood still, once in the Judeo-Christian Bible and one time in the Illinois House of Representatives. So that is another piece of his legend. Now you can argue whether he cheated or not. Obviously, that's a fair argument. But he knew the rules, and he knew how to bend them. That was a second piece of his legend. The third piece of what I've identified as legend was something called Operation Cobra. And for 3 years, beginning in 1987, Governor Thompson had pushed to increase the income tax, which was then 2.5%. You know, now it's 4.95. But it was then 2.5%. He wanted to push it to 3.5%. So it was a 40% increase. And Thompson kept pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. And he believed that Illinois government and schools, et cetera, needed more money to function better. And so Madigan, almost robotically, for 3 sessions, had come out and said, I don't believe in the need, I'm unconvinced of the need for this income tax by Governor Thompson. I mean, he just said that repeatedly. And then in, I believe it was May of the 3rd year, a couple of reporters, one was my mentor, Bill O'Connell. I worked at the Peoria Journal-Star then, and then the other paper scoop came from Charlie Wheeler with the Sun-Times and Mike Sneed with the Sun-Times. And we rolled out stories that said Madigan is going to come out with his own income tax increase. After he had been Dr. No for like 3 years, he comes out with his own income tax increase. It's a 20% increase. It goes, it was actually 18 point something increase. And he rolls it out, and Thompson has no idea this is coming. So when the papers hit the newsstand in the Capitol, there was this immediate buzz, and radios were picking it up, AP was picking it up, et cetera. And Thompson comes in, he looks, truly, he looked kind of punch drunk. He was just dazed by this. And he starts going up the grand staircase, and we're all running alongside of him trying to get his reaction. And finally he gets to the top of the 3rd floor, and I say in the book, he looked like he'd gone a couple of rounds with Ken Norton, the heavyweight boxing champion from Jacksonville, Illinois, and he just stunned, and he says, I'm gonna go see if it's true. I want to see if these reports are true. And so he goes back into Madigan's office right after that, and Madigan picks up one of the papers and he goes, "Banzai!" And that's one of the strangest times you'll see Madigan kind of joking, but also very serious about the matter. Then he goes in, he pushes this through in 6 hours. He pushes this income tax proposal through his chamber in 6 hours, with 60 Democratic votes. It eventually went to the Senate. They added a couple of pieces of property tax relief, sent it back to the House, and it became a straight 20% increase to an even 3, and it was for only 2 years. And so that whole power play, the most incredible push that I've ever seen, it was very fast and very lightning quick, was also what I call kind of the 3rd part of his legend. Now, there are other parts beyond that, and that's how I open the book with those 3 points, so people will get an idea of how he kind of grew into this powerful, mythical guy. And over the years, I'm not going to go step by step here, but let's then talk on past a few years and go to the time when we had Blagojevich as governor. Blagojevich was the first Democratic governor in the state for 26 years. And all the stars of all the Chicago warlords basically had aligned at that point to get that. Dick Mell was a powerful 33rd Ward alderman, and he was the father-in-law of Rod Blagojevich. Tom Hines was the powerful 19th Ward committeeman, and he had Dan Hines running for re-election for comptroller. Speaker Madigan, by that time state party chairman also, and still running one of the most powerful political organizations in the state from his 13th Ward headquarters, had Lisa Madigan running for Attorney General. And of course you had Jesse White, who was popular statewide, running also from Chicago. All of those aligned in this great confluence to like a really reflection of the old-time Chicago machine, and put every one of those people into place at statewide. So Blagojevich was the most unusual governor I covered. He was deceitful. He was not somebody you could believe in his word. He was a liar, and he had clashes and clashes with the lawmakers over just some basic stuff. But he would do things like, over the years, a simple example of what he would do would be get approval for bonding, and then he would make the bonding balloon payments so that he wouldn't have to pay much while he was in office, but down the road, when he was out of office, the big bills would pile up. He would try to do things that were popular, but not necessarily lawful. He went to try to get drugs from Canada and set up a system for that. He tried to get, when it sounded like there was a flu vaccine shortage, he went to Europe to get flu vaccine, and he committed Illinois to spending money that meant that they were getting drugs that were not FDA approved, and it didn't work out, and eventually those drugs weren't used in Illinois, and he thought, well, I'll send them to Pakistan, and then Pakistan got them, saw they were expired, and said, we don't want them either, so they destroyed them. So, but he also, we were writing, early on, we were writing stories that showed that it was very interesting that there were people given like $25,000 donations, and then they'd end up on a board, some state board or something like that, or one of their, some law group would give a donation, and then one of their members would end up on a board, or somebody to give a 25 donation or more, and they'd end up getting an appointment, et cetera. And we wrote about this, but nothing really happened, except one time Dick Mill said, he's selling these seats, and that was pandemonium at the time because it was an outright allegation of wrongdoing. And then he later pulled back and recanted. But as it turned out, there were a lot of cases like this. We eventually did a story at the Tribune that said, that found out, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was something like out of 235 exact $25,000 donations, we found that 75% of those could be traced to somebody getting something back from state government, whether it was a contract or whether it was an appointment or something else. There was, now could we write without investigative federal government powers or subpoenas that it was a definite quid pro quo? Nobody would admit that, but the idea that these people were giving exactly $25,000 and getting something out of government shook things up in Springfield, and they started, the lawmakers changed some laws to try to put some restrictions on these kinds of activities. But during this time, the feds were already crawling all over state government. One of the big issues that happened early on was that there were hiring irregularities. So you have to follow the rules, basically, just like here in the Chicago area, there's a Shackman law where it's an anti-patronage law where you're supposed to hire people by their talents rather than by their political connections. And so Blagojevich his administration was hiring people, and they were getting cited even by their own inspector general for violations of veterans preference and violations of patronage guidelines. Illinois has a law similar to Shackman, or a federal court case similar to Shackman, called the Rutan decision, and that was being violated repeatedly. And so Lisa Madigan actually was doing an investigation on hiring herself, and then Patrick Fitzgerald, who was the U.S. attorney, was also doing an investigation, and they realized they were going together, and she backed off and gave him her material, and he wrote a letter, and of course that was released to the press. It kind of gave Lisa political cover, but it also said that Fitzgerald had found endemic hiring fraud in like 11 or 12 agencies. And so this was all right when Blagojevich was running for re-election in 2006. And even so, Mike Madigan was co-chairman of Blagojevich's re-election campaign, and Senate President Emil Jones was also a backer. I can't tell if that clock is telling me I'm too long or not.
Fine.
Okay, all right, I'm sorry about that. And so, so even though it was clear and we were reporting that the feds were out there crawling all over the Blagojevich administration, Madigan was still backing Blagojevich for re-election. It was good for Democrats. You don't want to have a mess while you're breaking up the party on top for the governor, but the question was whether it was good for the people. But anyway, Blagojevich gets re-elected. He beats Judy Bartopinka, and a Green Party candidate ended up getting like 10 or 11 or 12%, mainly in my estimation because people were like a pox on all their houses and voting for the third option. So as you know, then as time went on, Blagojevich watched Barack Obama become president, and then after Obama was elected, he vacated his Senate seat. And so the feds already were taping Blagojevich at that point because they'd had inside sources of their own who had given them enough to get permission from a judge to be tapping his phones. And what they recorded was Blagojevich basically trying to trade off his appointment power for, you know, either a job for himself or maybe even one for his wife, but some kind of promotion for himself or backing for his next election, all kinds of things. Anyway, the feds viewed this as an attempt to sell the Senate seat, and they had him on a variety of things, but that was the marquee charge. And they went to his house before dawn, arrested him, and you know, drug him out in his jogging suit, and he appeared before the judge, etc. Madigan gives him about 6 or 7 days to decide whether to quit or they'd start impeachment movement. Then he went ahead with the impeachment because Blagojevich didn't decide to quit. In that period, he then appointed Roland Burris for the U.S. Senate seat that was open. And the impeachment went through. It was an overwhelming vote in the House. The Senate voted. They tossed him out not only from the job, but they also passed a resolution that said he could never come back and work in a state elected position. And so then we get to, so that was probably one of Madigan's highest moments at that point. But then in the last few years, things started to crack. There were cracks in the system. And one of the first ones was when a campaign worker named Elena Hampton called out one of Madigan's top lieutenants for sexual harassment. And eventually, she felt that she was blackballed from the organization, although the guy, Kevin Quinn, had stopped the harassment. He was the brother of Marty Quinn, the alderman, and Marty had told him to stop. He stopped, but Elena went to another campaign. She actually worked for Marie Newman against Dan Lipinski, and Lipinski and Madigan were allies, so that wasn't really a smart move on her part if she wanted to stay in good with the Madigan people. But then she eventually wrote Madigan a letter and said, you know, this is why I left, because of the harassment situation. And she had been offered, she says, a chance to be a precinct captain in Madigan's elite, really top-notch political organization. But she said she didn't want to do it because she would end up back in the same place with the same guy who had been her harasser. And so she went off on her own, and then Madigan eventually decides to jettison Kevin Quinn, and the day before he did that, I had an interview with Elena, and she had told me this whole story, and I you know, I spent all kinds of time walking back, going over my notes. It was late on a Sunday night, and then I'm thinking, I've got all this great information. She gave me text, she gave me all kinds of context, etc. You know, but I'm still going to have to play cat and mouse with the Madigan organization to get their side of the story. So I'm thinking this could take weeks to smoke this out totally. And then I get in the office the next morning at about 10 o'clock. Madigan's office says, I want to say that we've thrown Kevin Quinn out of the organization, and a courageous woman came forward, et cetera, but he didn't name her. So, you know, it looked like it looked like maybe he had heard, but they claimed they hadn't heard that I'd done an interview, but it looked like he might have been trying to get ahead of the story one way or another. But what happened was I still had the interview. I still had all her quotes. I had video of her. I had copies of her texts. She filed on Monday. It was a Monday, Lincoln's birthday. So, you know, he kind of played it so that there wasn't going to be a whole lot of people out there available for reaction. Pardon me. And she filed an EEO suit with the same kind of charges that Monday. I got a copy of it. We had this whole big package blowout the next day, and she said, you know, Kevin should have been fired a year ago. And then the next day, he's holding a press conference in Springfield, and she's holding a press conference up here. And it just kind of lingered over the entire session. That was 2018. And even though and she eventually sued and they settled, but even though that they passed some legislation to take some steps forward, and Madigan admitted repeatedly that he wished he'd done more to have a better atmosphere, the whole issue just kind of weakened him. Even though he picked up more people in the next race, that issue was still kind of hanging. And so when the ComEd issue popped in July of 2020, he was named Public Official A. And in July 2020, we're only months from the November election. And so Republicans had a field day. They'd always tried to find ways to damage Madigan politically, but they hung this ComEd scandal around his neck like an albatross and tied him to J.B. Pritzker's effort to raise the income tax on the highest wage earners, and used Madigan as baggage on that. They did the same thing. They used him as baggage on a Supreme Court justice who he had supported. This is Tom Kilbright in the 3rd Supreme Court District. And he lost retention. He wasn't even running against anybody. He needed to get 60% of the vote, and it was the first time a Supreme Court justice ever lost a retention race. And Madigan lost a seat in the House, which, you know, kind of only one seat was not that big a deal, but still it showed that there was some weakness there. And then you saw Dick Durbin come out and say, you know, I think he ought to be removed as the chairman of the party. And then Tammy Duckworth comes out and says he ought to be removed as chairman of the party and of the speakership. And then Mike Quigley said the same thing. Pritzker said he ought to be removed from chairman of the party. And meanwhile, one lawmaker, after the case with ComEd broke, had said, I'm running against Madigan for speaker, and that was Stephanie Kipwood of the suburbs there. And she continued to do that. After the election results, that had built up tension. More people started to say they weren't going to support Madigan. And then McLean and Ann Pramaggiore, who was CEO of Exelon and ComEd, was indicted. Both of them were indicted, along with a couple of lobbyists. And more people started saying they weren't going to support Madigan. And you guys know the rest. He tried to get 60 votes from his caucus, what he needed, and he had 70 plus people in his caucus. He couldn't get the votes. He suspended his campaign. Chris Welch was able to pull together a majority, and the speaker's reign was over. And that is a summary of where we are with Mike Madigan today. He's stepped down from his legislative seat. He also gave up, obviously he gave up the speakership, but he also gave up the chairmanship of the party. And he isn't planning to run for the central committeeman job that allowed him to be chairman in the party also. And there's some talk that he's maybe giving up the 13th Ward committeeman job that he's had since 1969. So that is really the summary, and I'm ready for your questions because I know you surely have many.
Thank you, Ray. Who's going to play Speaker Madigan in the in the primetime series? High drama. Thank you. Yes, we will have questions, but first, we're going to have a brief musical interlude. We invite you to make contributions at our website. You should be seeing a link in YouTube chat. Folks who are in the audience, there is a box, or a basket rather, that you can pop some money into. There are QR codes that you can scan and use those to make a contribution. We suggest a donation of $5. It is through your generosity that we're able to run the society and bring you programs such as this. Any amount that you're comfortable with is greatly appreciated, and we always want to thank all of our volunteers who sustain the society with financial contributions and their time. All right. And for those of you who are here now, what we're going to do is we're going right, welcome back. All right, so now we're going to have some in-person questions, and I have some questions being texted to me from YouTube chat. So Ray, if you want to come back up here, and we have already someone wanting to ask a question.
Hi, thank you, Ray. My question, and this is coming from, I have not been in Illinois my lifetime, right? So is Illinois a uniquely corrupt government compared to rest of America or anything? And if it is the case, what makes it so?
Well, I'll give a short answer on that. It's a very unusual state. There's no doubt about it. And it has been rated up there with the most corrupt, with, say, New Jersey, Louisiana, et cetera. We seem to collect more high-powered figures in our lineup of corruption than some of the other states. So I can say it's a full employment plan for reporters, for sure, and prosecutors also. But I think one of the things that could help change the culture would be if we had more transparency in what types of things are going on with the lawmakers. For example, Madigan was indicted for allegedly setting up a property transaction of property that was owned by the state to the city, where Danny Solis would change the zoning, and then Madigan could benefit from getting business from the developers who took that piece of property and put a motel or whatever it was they wanted to put on there. If we knew that there were conflicts involved in that, for right now, lawmakers don't even have to declare a conflict. And when they do, they don't have to say what it is. And so it would be good to know what is happening in their minds as well as what is going on in their pocketbooks, right? And so that's one thing. They also have something called an economic interest statement that they fill out, that they have such obscure questions or vague questions that most of the lawmakers will simply write none on each line. And so its nickname is the none statement, right? Because now there's exceptions. They'll say things. Madigan files things like he has money in this account or in this investment, but you don't know how much. You don't know whether there's some connection between that and legislation. I'm not saying he would do that, but you just don't know. And you should be able to see well enough so that there's a check, a bigger and better check on government. There's a variety of other things that could be done too. Open meetings could be better. Freedom of information, it could be better. Public information officers, I call often public information obstructionists, because they basically run interference too often when you're asking a question, a basic thing, or a basic thing that you used to be able to call up the director of an agency. You'll get interference from a public information officer who then says, you gotta file a Freedom of Information Act for something like that. So, you know, there needs to be more openness and more transparency, and they could use other states for models, for templates to change these laws, but they're always afraid that, oh, we're getting too close, we don't want to be giving away our, you know, we shouldn't have to take an economic bath or whatever to be a lawmaker. But, you know, it hasn't worked that well the way they do it now. I would argue that more openness is better.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I got a bunch of questions, but
Sure.
I'll only give you two. Can you give us more about the parameters of the 13th Ward in Madigan's district? And the next thing is, I grew up in Chicago until I was 36, and then I moved away. But I grew up under Mayor Richard J. Daley. And there was a general sense that corruption was there, but it was good graft, and as long as the city worked, it wasn't, we were going to accept this. And I don't know if that idea has inertia. So those are my questions.
Yeah, well, take the last one first. There is this kind of undercurrent of corruption that just doesn't seem to go away. And sometimes it's just simple stuff at low level, but it means somebody's getting a break when everybody should have a shot. And one of the allegations in the indictment, and one of the things that ComEd acknowledged in their deferred prosecution agreement, I don't know if I elaborated on that, back in July 2020, the issue that came out was ComEd had agreed to a deferred prosecution agreement where they were charged with bribery. They would pay a $200 million fine. They would cooperate with the investigation. They acknowledged that they had been showering jobs on Madigan allies and college students to have internships in order to win favor with the speaker in hopes that he would favor their legislation. Well, let's take one of those. One of those would be the college kids, right? So he allegedly would load up ComEd with a dozen or more college kids from his ward, and the allegation is that not all of them met the minimal requirements that ComEd had, but they would still get clouded in. As a result, somebody else would get clouded out. And so there are, you could call that corruption at a low level, but it's a question of fairness too. And people should not be losing out to clout, but just because somebody's winning in clout, you know somebody else is losing in clout. And so that's one. And what was your first question again?
Where is the 13th Ward in
Okay.
Madigan's district?
Yeah, it's basically around Midway. It's in the southwest side. If you kind of envision the way it runs out into, there's a little area that kind of pokes out there where Midway is, and south and west of Midway, and on a couple of neighborhoods on the north and I guess it'd be east side of Midway too. So he has the ward had started out huge when he started out. You know, it was a huge mix of all kinds of different ethnic groups, Lithuanian, all types of European type groups, and has gradually changed now to probably 60% Hispanic. But he worked the Hispanic vote too. So he got in one ward, and I can't remember the numbers, it's in my book, but it was something like 95% in a precinct that was totally Hispanic or close to totally Hispanic. So he knew how to work. I mean, one of the things he did was he was big on constituent services, and he drove constituent services. If somebody had a problem, they'd be on it, and they would, you know, whether it was a tree that needed to be trimmed or a street that needed to be shoveled or cleared, they'd be on it. So that's roughly, does that help? Roughly where his ward is.
I have a question from YouTube. I assume no one close to Madigan cooperated with you on the book. How did you get your material, and can you say anything about his use of burner phones and other secretive practices that he used?
Well, I can't say who all cooperated with me on the book. I will say this, though. since the book came out, there have been some people who I never thought would cooperate with me who have said, hey, if you're going to do another book, I got some stuff too. And makes me think. My wife is like, we're not doing another book, but there's some interesting things that are coming out. And there are people that I quote in the book, and their names are fair game, but the people I don't quote in the book, I'll never give up. So.
So was there anything from the Citizen Utility Board, the CUB, with the latest, before Madigan got taken out with the ComEd situation? So how were they involved? Like, I used to support them, but I heard that they were as much involved in it as the electrical companies? Yeah,
the full extent of CUB's effort is unclear to me, totally. I know there's been some reports that have said that they benefited financially from some of the deals that went down that helped ComEd too. And I can't remember the specifics about that, but I think WBEZ did some stories about that, and you could certainly look that up there, and I apologize for not knowing more about it, but I'd rather tell you I don't know than try to wing it.
Thank you.
You mentioned that Lisa and Mike Madigan didn't agree on some issues. Did he help to put her into office? And can you talk about that dynamic a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. Initially, she expressed an interest in running for office for Senate and for the state Senate. And she heard from her father, who said, I'm going to send you out and talk to some people and various friends who could give you the full picture of how tough it is to be a politician and a public servant, et cetera, et cetera. And she went out, she talked to all those people, and she came back and she was like, I think I can make a difference. You've showed me you can make a difference, and I want to do it. So eventually he got on board, and she ran against a guy named Bruce Farley, who was a state senator. He had been a House Democrat for years and was a Madigan ally, a Speaker Madigan ally. And then he got indicted, and she was living in his district, and she ran against him and beat him. And she was a rising star. She wasn't in the Senate that long, and then she suddenly ran for AG. And again, Mike Madigan was a little hesitant, I'm told by friends, that he was initially hesitant that she'd be running for statewide office that soon. But once he got in, he was totally in. And it was, yes, he helped her a lot. It was a total Madigan, full court press, full effort. And they pushed her hard. She won. She ran in the primary against a guy named John Schmidt, who had worked at the U.S. Justice Department. I think he was number 3 in the Justice Department in the Clinton administration. He got creamed by her. And then she ran against Joe Burkett, who was DuPage County State's Attorney for a long time. And it was a tight, hard battle, and she eventually won by 3 percentage points or something to that effect. And then he would help her with her legislative agenda, and that's one reason this piece in the indictment is kind of intriguing, right? Because we got an inside glimpse of how he would push for his own agenda with ComEd, which was landing some people on the payroll, but he would also tell ComEd, yeah, you can go ahead and kill her legislation, and ComEd worked against it and did kill it, but Madigan, the speaker, voted for it too. So he was playing it several different ways, but mostly he was in her corner. That was her last, by the way, that was her last year in office too. She'd already declared that she wasn't running again for Attorney General, and so you got to wonder if that played a factor in his decision too. Yeah.
Thanks for your talk. I had two questions. The first, I wondered if you could say more about Madigan's law firm and his influence on the Cook County property tax system. And then just sort of more broadly going forward, do you think he's left a vacuum that's going to be filled, or do you think there really could be a more systemic change where there's not so much concentrated power?
Yeah, both are good questions. Thank you. He is a powerful property tax attorney, and he said to us one time when he was pushing a millionaire's tax that we asked him, well, are you going to be paying more if there's a millionaire's tax? And he said, well, in good years I make more than $1 million at the law firm. Some of the things that he has done for the law firm is be the rainmaker. That's the main thing he does. He's not the one doing the calculations and writing up the lawsuits. He's got other folks for that. But they do, from all I can tell, they do quality work. But a lot of people think it's a great advantage to have the Speaker of the House's property tax firm working for him. And for a large part of the time in the last decade, Joe Barrios, who was Democratic Party chairman, pardon me, was the assessor. And so Madigan's people would be going into a friendly voice when they were asking for property tax reductions. One of the most remarkable stories I saw about his property tax firm was that, and this was maybe 10 years ago, a couple of my pals at the Trib wrote a story that said that his firm had approximately 40% of the downtown skyscrapers, and they had a pretty successful track record of knocking down that money. And of course, if the skyscrapers aren't paying that money, somebody else is, because the schools and the city and everybody else needs to have money to operate. And then the second part, is there a vacuum? There's a huge vacuum right now, because Madigan used to have so much control. He controlled so many of the levers of politics, and he would use that to influence legislation. You know, if this bill could hurt one of his House Democrats, he's not going to let it move forward. Or if he thinks it would help, then it would move forward. But he also would use his politics not only to do legislation, but to have a broader influence in different sections of the state, even though he was clearly Chicago-centric. He had a voice on the statewide ticket. He was the party chairman for 20 years, and more than 20 years, since 1998 until last year. And so he had all of that. He also used legislation to benefit his politics. So you use politics to benefit your legislation, you use legislation to benefit your politics, you got that lever. He had influence on lobbyists, because a lot of those were ex-staffers, and they were loyal to Madigan, and that would help them get access, and that access would help them get clients to lobby for. So he had this tremendous reach, and nobody right now has that kind of reach now that he's gone. For example, J.B. Pritzker, first termer, he doesn't have that kind of reach yet. Chris Welch is a first termer as speaker. Don Harmon's maybe not a first termer, but he's only been there a few years. And Robin Kelly, the new Democratic chairman, has just been there for a little over a year. So all of those people are among the people who are raising their hands and wanting more power. Look at the mayor's in her first term too. And everybody wants their say, but nobody has the kind of say that Madigan did. And so yes, there's a vacuum, and it's kind of fun to watch to see who's going to emerge as the new power. And would it be better to have a more diffuse dynamic? I think we'll find that out for a while, because I think everybody is going to be pushing to be the big dog, and nobody will achieve it very quickly.
Thank you for today's presentation.
Yeah, thanks.
I came to Chicago from Minnesota for graduate school, and my baptism was rather quick because I was in the 39th Ward with Alderman Anthony Lorino.
Right.
So it was a quick baptism into patronage.
Yeah.
Right. But I'm interested more on the larger scale, like public work projects, not just the precinct captain in the 39th who gets the gravel contract, the snow plowing contract, the hauling contract, but like major public works contracts.
Yeah. Well, when George Ryan was the governor, there was something he called Illinois First, which he rolled out as a big construction package. And one element of that, kind of a subset of that, was money that lawmakers themselves actually had the biggest voice in. So they put together about $1.5 billion or $1.6 billion, over $1 billion clearly in the first year, including each caucus got $350 million to spread around over 4 years with George. Some of them, Madigan tried to piece it out over the years. The Republicans were like spending it immediately to try to, you know, bring together goodwill, political goodwill in their district by using public money to do stadiums and bike paths and I mean smaller stadiums, you know, high school stadiums, bleachers, those kinds of things, or you know, just get a street paved that they wanted paved. So there also are the bigger projects, like when George Ryan ran, there was something called the Hillside Strangler that bollocksed up traffic every day, and he put signs out in it during his campaign that said, "I will fix this mess," you know, and so he was able to use his clout to then put together projects. And I saw all kinds of different things over the years that range from Hillside Strangler to getting more support for O'Hare to expand. And one of the, since we're talking about Madigan, one of the more creative, shall we say, moves he did one time was when Quinn was in his last year in office. Madigan wasn't sure if Quinn was going to win, and Madigan had his ups and downs with Quinn too. And Rauner looked like he might be going to win. This was in 2014. And so Madigan, instead of directing money for school construction in his district and some other allies districts, he, instead of putting it in the State Board of Education, he sent it to Jesse White's office, the Secretary of State, a guy who has nothing to do with education money at all. And Quinn signed it. And then when Rauner came in and froze money going to projects around the state, everybody who had money for their schools in the State Board of Education was frozen. But Madigan's money went straight through because Jesse White didn't have any restrictions on how to play it. So, you know, you give him points for being crafty too, but it's you know, he knew how to play the game. But that's, you know, kind of a variety of different actions that they used clout on. Yeah.
Ray, thank you for the 50-year tour of Illinois politics. And I'd like to ask you to pivot to the present and your thoughts on the Republican primary, Richard Irvin, Ken Griffin. What's going on?
Well, I can't take a position on that. I mean, I'm a straight-up guy. I'm not a columnist or a editorial board guy who can take opinions. But I would just urge you to pay attention to the papers, and because we're the ones, and you know, broadcasters too, are the ones that are out there trying to keep track of you know, where Ken Griffin's money is going and why it's going to Richard Irvin and other people who are running on a slate of Republicans. And I just think that people need to be paying attention to what reporters are writing. And I would urge you to read Rick Pearson. He's not only my pal, but he's probably the best political reporter, at least in the Midwest, if not the country. And other stories that we're rolling out, the importance of knowing what's going on is demonstrated every day in Washington too. You see it when you see governments that don't give you the straight dope, and I think you've got to find news sources that give it to you straight rather than with a slant. And more people are not subscribing to newspapers, and I could get on a roll about that, but here's a snapshot that tells it all. I was riding the elevator up to my condo a couple of years ago, and it was a couple of days before the election, and a couple of younger people were on the elevator, and they said, "Man, I don't know anything about this Lori somebody who's running for mayor, and this other person, Preck something, you know, is running too, and you know, I just wish there was a place we could go to find out information about these people." And I'm like, ah. So I just can't really give you a total spin because I just write it straight. So I would just urge you to keep reading.
A couple more questions from YouTube. Did Madigan ever target reporters for attribution when they did on flattery investigative work?
For attribution, I wonder.
I'm sorry, retribution.
Retribution, okay.
Did you know?
Yeah, I mean, the time I talked about the Operation Cobra, the Tribune was sealed out. I wasn't with the Tribune then, but there was no way the Tribune was going to learn about that. The Peoria paper got the scoop and the Sun-Times got the scoop, but Madigan made it clear to all his people nobody was going to tell the Tribune because they'd been hitting hard on him for a variety of things, and he was mad at him. And, you know, there were times that he wouldn't talk to me because he wasn't happy with the story I did. But, you know, you just keep swinging.
This is a question for me. What motivated him? I mean, it doesn't sound like he got very rich from this. Comfortable, but probably not much more comfortable than an average, you know, well-to-do lawyer. But like, what do you think is the motivation behind him?
Well, he didn't have to worry about money because he had the property tax law firm. He was making money off of that. People could argue whether or not he benefited from being a high-profile politician with a lot of power. But it's a really curious thing. He once said in an interview that I don't put an adjective before Democrat when people ask me if I'm a Democrat. I don't say I'm a conservative Democrat. I don't say I'm a moderate Democrat. I don't say I'm a liberal Democrat. I'm a Democrat. And I believe that he used that as a way to be flexible. Because if you think about it, this is a guy who started out on the Southwest side, first elected in 1970, with coming from kind of a Catholic enclave with a conservative social view. But over the years, he worked with a caucus that changed quite a bit. And that caucus for a long time would support things, as I recall. I could be misremembering, but I believe that the House voted back in the 80s or 90s for for a ban on partial birth abortion. By the end of Madigan's term, they were supporting an expansion of abortion rights. And he supported gay marriage too. And he stood up and said, Pope Francis said, who am I to judge? And therefore, who am I to judge? And that not only gave him reason to go that direction, but it also gave some of his fellow lawmakers political cover they needed to, if they were Catholics, and voted that way. So he changed when he had to. When the federal courts ruled that Illinois, the last state to have a ban on concealed carry, had to have a concealed carry law, had to allow concealed carry. Madigan, who had opposed concealed carry for decades, got in and worked with the other side until they could jam through a compromise, and he basically forged that. So he was not a hard ideological person. He was a guy who was flexible and was all about winning the majority. As long as he had the majority, he could be flexible.
Well, that is a great final word. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Ray.
Thank you.
I'm now going to read the announcements, which will be projected behind me on the screen and to the YouTube audience. So for our next Community Day on Sunday, April 10th, we'll have an all-ages service day. We'll gather in our auditorium, which is here, to work on several projects, including lunch packing for Lincoln Park Community Services, paracord bracelets for Operation Gratitude, happy socks for Shelter Cats, bracelets for Rainbows for All Children, and fleece blankets for Project Linus. This meeting will be in person only. Our film discussion group will meet again virtually on Monday, April 11th at 7:15 p.m. We'll discuss Belfast and The Handmaiden, both available now on Amazon Prime Video. Contact our office for more information or for the link to join. And then on Sunday, April 24th, artist and certified professional gardener Pam Carlson will present Birds in the Garden, creating and enjoying a bird oasis. Inviting birds into our gardens by creating habitat is a joyful way to both connect with nature and to support bird populations. With photos from the Chicago Bird Garden that she created, Pam will illustrate how it's possible to attract over 100 bird species. Her tips will include landscape enhancements, best practices in plant selection, along with an emphasis on native plants. She will also discuss Chicagoland's importance along the migratory route. And for more details on upcoming Sunday morning programs and other activities, see our website at ethicalhumanistsociety.org. Connect with us on Facebook and Twitter, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for videos of past speakers and future streaming programs. Thank you so much for coming, and we'll see you next time.